Welcome to Verge File.
Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. I had asked the simplest question. "Want to watch that show we started?" She didn't even look at me. Just kept scrolling on her phone, the blue light flickering across her face like I wasn't even there. Then, without blinking, she said it. "I'm not your toy." For words. Calm. Precise. Practiced. They cut deeper than anything I'd heard from her in 9 years of marriage. It wasn't annoyance in her voice. It was colder than that. Final, like a locked door. I just stood there, glass of water in my hand, feeling my heartbeat slow instead of race. She leaned back, tossed her phone on the couch, and added, "I'm not here to entertain you, or satisfy you, or be on just because you want attention." I hadn't asked her to entertain me. I hadn't touched her in a week. All I'd wanted was a shared moment, a thread of connection. But she was already back to scrolling, conversation over. The truth? This wasn't new. The signs had been there for months, maybe longer. The locked phone. The change in how she dressed when she went out, but not for me. The sarcasm every time I made a suggestion. The way intimacy had gone from spontaneous to mechanical to nothing. She blamed stress. Hormones. A phase. I believed her. I told myself we'd work through it. But she wasn't working on anything. She was building a life where I didn't exist. And I loved her. That was the worst part. I'd supported her finding herself, starting her freelance business, buying the new wardrobe, taking yoga again. I thought we were growing together. But somewhere along the way, she decided I was the weight she needed to drop. That night, after she went to bed without saying goodnight, I sat alone in the dark, not staring at the TV, not scrolling my phone, just letting those 4 words echo in my head. She wanted independence. She was about to get it. No announcement. No warnings. No shouting. I just stopped. Stopped folding her laundry. Stopped making her coffee. Stopped asking about her day. Stopped making 2 plates at dinner. Stopped checking her car registration, or the insurance renewal, or the little threads that kept her life running smoothly. At first, she didn't notice. Or maybe she thought she didn't care. She strutted around like she'd just given a TED talk on female liberation. The yoga outfits got tighter. The Instagram stories more curated. She sipped green smoothies at 3 p.m. and talked about removing toxic masculine energy from the house. Apparently, I was the toxin. So I became the cure, silence. I hit the gym after work, came home late. If I cooked, it was for one. I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't wait up. And for a little while, she thought she liked it. Until the night her car battery died. Her text came while I was in the shower. "My car won't start. Come help me." I read it twice, then a third time, and for the first time in years. I ignored it. The text about her dead battery sat on my phone like an unanswered call from another life. I didn't respond. I finished my shower, shaved, and made myself a late dinner. By the time I glanced at my phone again, an hour had passed. Another text had arrived. Never mind. I figured it out. No punctuation. No warmth. The next morning, she barely looked at me. I could see it. The faint crease between her eyebrows. The clipped way she moved around the kitchen. She wasn't angry about the battery. She was unsettled by the fact that I hadn't jumped the second she needed me. That was new. A week earlier, she would have called twice, maybe 3 times, demanding I come fix it. Now, she didn't even try. Maybe she thought she could play it cool. But control is addictive, and losing it leaves withdrawal symptoms. I kept my pace slow and deliberate. Nothing obvious. I still spoke when necessary, still did my share of the housework, but I had removed the invisible scaffolding she'd relied on without ever noticing. I no longer reminded her about deadlines, appointments, birthdays. I didn't fill in the gaps in her day. I let them stay empty. It started to show in small ways. She forgot to pay the water bill and got the late fee notice. She missed her dentist appointment because I hadn't reminded her. She burned dinner because she was too busy on her phone to notice the timer. Each time, I simply observed. I offered no fixes. That's when she started watching me differently. Not with affection, not with anger. More like curiosity mixed with suspicion. She'd glance up from her phone when I walked in, her eyes narrowing just slightly. She began asking casual, loaded questions. "Who were you with?" Or "Why so dressed up for the gym?" I'd answer with the same neutral tone, giving her nothing to hold on to. I knew she was starting to feel it, the imbalance shifting. She had built her power on my predictability. But now I was unpredictable, and unpredictability makes people nervous. The first real crack came on a Saturday. She walked into the living room with 2 glasses of wine and a smile that looked rehearsed. She said she thought we could just hang out like old times. I glanced at the wine, then at her, and told her I was heading to bed. I didn't wait for her reaction. I didn't need to, because I could already feel it. Her certainty slipping, her control evaporating. And this was only the beginning. The wine offer was her first attempt to pull me back in, but I didn't bite. I went to bed that night knowing something had shifted. She was no longer operating from a position of comfort. Now she was playing defense, even if she didn't realize it yet. It was 2 weeks into my quiet withdrawal when the first piece of proof fell into my lap. I wasn't looking for it. I had decided early on that I wouldn't snoop, wouldn't dig, wouldn't feed the cliché of the jealous husband. But sometimes, evidence doesn't need to be hunted. It walks right in. She had left her laptop open on the dining table while she took a shower. It wasn't unusual, but the tab at the top caught my eye. A social media profile I didn't recognize, the name shortened to just an initial, M. The profile picture wasn't visible, but the message preview on the screen was enough. Last night was worth the risk. I didn't move. I didn't touch the computer. I just let the words burn themselves into my memory. They didn't hurt the way I expected. The shock I'd felt months ago, when intimacy between us had started to disappear, had been worse. This was confirmation, not a revelation. That night, I sat across from her at dinner, calm, even smiling slightly. She asked about my day. I gave her vague, polished answers. She didn't notice the difference, but I did. The weight was already shifting from my shoulders to hers. Over the next week, patterns began to stand out. Late-night texts followed by early morning showers. Phone face down during dinner. A sudden interest in networking events and client dinners. The lies were almost lazy. She was confident I wouldn't question her. I didn't. I kept the silence alive. I let her feel untouchable, because untouchable people make careless mistakes. By the 3rd week, the mistakes multiplied. A receipt in her purse for a dinner in a part of town she never visited. A whiff of unfamiliar cologne on her sweater. A new piece of jewelry she claimed was just something I bought myself. I said nothing. I simply began to disappear a little more each day, physically, emotionally, financially. She didn't see it yet, but the game had already moved into a new phase. Because once you have proof, you don't confront. You calculate. And I had just started counting. The night I decided to vanish, I didn't pack a bag. I didn't slam a door. I didn't leave a note. I simply stopped being available. It started small. I forgot to answer her texts for hours at a time. I left early for the gym before she woke up. I stayed late at work, even when I didn't need to. When she asked where I'd been, I gave her the same answer every time. Out. No details, no explanations. Just a wall of calm indifference. At first, she pretended not to care. She'd nod absently, say, okay, and go back to scrolling on her phone. But the edges of her composure began to fray. She'd asked the same question twice, her voice too casual. She started watching the clock when I wasn't home. Then I cut off the lifelines. I disabled the joint credit card and transferred my savings into a private account. I changed the passwords to everything I managed for the house, utilities, insurance, even the streaming accounts. I left her just enough to live comfortably, but not enough to feel secure. She didn't notice right away. That was the beauty of it. Slow erosion feels like nothing until the floor caves in. One Thursday evening, I didn't come home at all. No warning. No message. I stayed at a hotel downtown, had dinner alone, slept better than I had in months. When I walked through the door the next morning, she was standing in the kitchen, hair still messy from sleep, her voice sharp. Where were you? I shrugged. Out. Her jaw tightened. She didn't push, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. She wanted to demand answers, but that would mean admitting she didn't know where I'd been, and that would give me the advantage. That weekend, I escalated. I left my phone in airplane mode for an entire day. When I turned it back on, there were 5 missed calls and a string of short, clipped messages. Call me. Where are you? This isn't funny. I read them all, then set the phone down without replying. Because this wasn't about making her jealous. It wasn't about revenge. This was about creating a silence so deep, so heavy, that she would feel the absence in her bones. And she had no idea that this was only phase 2. Her silence toward me had always been a weapon. Now, mine was sharper. But disappearing was only half the plan. The other half was making sure the man she thought was an escape route became the weakest link in her life. I already knew who he was. His name wasn't hard to find. Careless posts on her social media had given it away weeks ago. Mark Reynolds, a consultant, though from what I could see, the only thing he was consulting was his own ego. He had a profile full of inspirational quotes and photos of overpriced cocktails, but behind that polished surface was something rotten. I didn't follow him. I didn't send messages. I didn't let my name cross his radar. I simply started pulling threads. A contact at a local bank confirmed what I suspected. Mark was drowning in debt. Another old acquaintance from college mentioned his tendency to overpromise on projects and underdeliver. He had burned more than a few bridges. The best lead came from a public business registry. His company had a pending lawsuit for breach of contract. I didn't need to touch it. I just needed to make sure the right people saw it. A well-placed email to a potential client. An anonymous tip to a journalist friend who covered small business scandals. The beauty was in the timing. Each whisper landed like a raindrop, barely noticeable at first. But together, they formed a storm cloud over Mark's head. He didn't know where it came from, but I did. Meanwhile, at home, her mood was shifting. She was on edge, checking her phone more often, leaving the room to take calls. She laughed less, smiled less. The outfits she'd worn so confidently to her networking events started staying in the closet. I never asked why. I never mentioned Mark. I simply observed, letting her feel the weight of a world that was slowly closing in. By the time she began spending more evenings at home, I knew the pressure was working. She wasn't retreating because she missed me. She was retreating because her safe haven was crumbling. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to see them together. My hand was invisible, but the damage was permanent, and I was only getting started. Mark's world was unraveling quietly, but hers was about to fracture in full view. The trick wasn't to expose her. It was to let others connect the dots. People believe what they discover themselves far more than what they're told. I started with proximity. A casual lunch with her oldest friend, someone she trusted. No accusations, no stories, just subtle observations. I mentioned how we'd been spending more time apart lately, and let my tone carry a hint of resignation. That was all it took. People love to fill in blanks, and she would become their favorite mystery. A week later, I had coffee with her brother. I didn't bring her up at all. I knew he'd ask eventually. When he did, I simply said, "She's been busy," and left it there. The pause was deliberate. Silence invites suspicion. From there, it spread naturally. Friends, family, mutual acquaintances, all hearing pieces of the puzzle, all assembling their own versions of the story. They didn't need proof. They had patterns. They'd seen the shift in her demeanor, the sudden bursts of secrecy, the way she avoided direct questions. The first sign it was working came during a small family gathering. She walked in, expecting the usual warmth. Instead, she was met with polite smiles, fewer hugs, shorter conversations. Her mother barely looked at her. Her sister stayed glued to her phone. I didn't comfort her. I didn't ask if she was okay. I just watched as she tried to make small talk, the energy in the room sliding away from her. She laughed too loudly at someone's joke, and it fell flat. In the days that followed, she became restless. She stayed off social media more, avoided calls, spent evenings in the bedroom instead of the living room. Her texts to friends went unanswered longer. The invitations stopped coming. I knew the isolation was setting in when she asked me, casually, but not casually, if I'd heard from certain mutual friends. I shrugged and told her I hadn't spoken to them in weeks. It wasn't true, but it was exactly what she needed to hear. Because the more she felt the walls closing in, the more she'd look for a lifeline. And I had no intention of offering one. The shift was subtle at first. She started lingering in the kitchen when I was there, offering to pour me coffee, asking about my day with an interest that sounded rehearsed. I responded politely, but never with detail. I gave her nothing to build on. A few days later, she suggested we watch a movie together, something we hadn't done in months. I declined, saying I had work to finish. I could see the flicker of frustration in her eyes, quickly masked by a smile. She was testing the waters, trying to find the version of me who used to be easy to reach. She didn't realize that version was gone. The more she tried, the colder I became. Not in a way she could accuse me of. No slammed doors, no raised voice. Just absence. My attention was elsewhere, my schedule my own. I made plans without telling her. I left the house without announcing when I'd be back. I came home late enough that she was already in bed. Then came the direct attempt. One Saturday morning, she sat across from me at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug like it was a prop in a scene she'd been rehearsing. She told me she'd been thinking a lot, and that maybe we should reset. I didn't ask what she meant. I just sipped my coffee and said, "I don't think that's necessary." Her smile faltered. She wasn't expecting that answer. She thought I'd jump at the offer, that I'd take whatever scraps of affection she decided to throw my way. Instead, I left the table, grabbed my jacket, and went for a run. When I returned an hour later, she was still at the table, her phone untouched. I walked past her without a word. That night, I heard her on the phone in the other room. The tone was low, urgent. Frustration bled through the walls. She was talking to someone, maybe a friend, maybe him. But the message was clear. Whatever control she'd once had, it was slipping fast. And she couldn't figure out why I wasn't trying to pull her back. That was the point. The more she reached, the further I drifted. Until eventually, she'd have no choice but to face the truth. I wasn't in her orbit anymore. It was late on a Tuesday when she finally snapped. I had just come in from the gym, still damp from the cold night air, when I found her standing in the hallway. No phone in her hand, no distraction, just waiting. She asked where I'd been. I told her out. She said she was tired of one-word answers. I said, "Then stop asking questions you already know I won't answer." Her voice rose, but not into a shout, more like the edge of panic dressed up as anger. She wanted to know why I'd changed, why I was acting like a stranger. She threw out phrases like, "We need to talk," and "You're pushing me away," as if she hadn't spent months doing the same to me. I didn't argue. I didn't list my reasons. I didn't bring up Mark or the late nights or the receipts that didn't match her stories. That would have given her a battlefield, a place to fight. Instead, I gave her nothing. Silence is harder to counter than accusations. When she demanded to know if there was someone else, I met her eyes and said, "There's someone else I'm focusing on me." Then I walked past her to the kitchen. I could feel her stare on my back, the weight of her confusion growing heavier by the second. She followed me in, still trying to pull me into a conversation. She asked if I cared about this marriage. I said, "I care about not wasting my time." That was it. No elaboration. No emotion. By the end of the night, she had retreated to the bedroom alone. I heard drawers opening, the sharp click of her phone being plugged in, the muted sound of typing. Maybe she was venting to a friend. Maybe she was texting him. Either way, she was scrambling. And I wasn't. For the first time in years, the balance had shifted entirely. She was the one pacing the floors, wondering what I was thinking, what I was doing, who I was with. She wanted clarity. I gave her fog. She wanted control. I gave her chaos. And in that silence, I knew the game was almost over. By the time winter settled in, she was a shadow of the woman who once strutted through the house with her phone glued to her hand and that constant air of superiority. Her confidence had eroded, replaced by a restless energy she couldn't hide. Friends no longer called. The ones who did kept their distance, conversations short and perfunctory. Her brother barely spoke to her at family gatherings. Even her mother, once her most loyal defender, seemed guarded, avoiding the kind of long talks they used to have. The cracks in her facade widened when Mark finally disappeared from the picture. I didn't know the exact moment it happened, but I saw the signs. No more late-night work events. No new jewelry. No unexplained absences. The only thing she brought home now was silence. At home, she tried to fill that silence with me, but it was too late. I was already living in a different world, my own. I'd started traveling more for work, taking weekend trips, reconnecting with old friends she'd once subtly pushed out of my life. My schedule wasn't something I shared anymore. She'd ask where I was going, and I'd say, "Out." The same way I had from the beginning. The house had changed too. I'd redecorated the living room while she was away one weekend. New furniture, new colors, a style that reflected me alone. The old framed photos of us were gone, replaced with art and landscapes. She walked in, looked around, and said nothing. But her eyes told me she felt the shift. She spent more time in the bedroom, door closed, curtains drawn. Sometimes I'd hear her pacing. Other times, it was just the faint hum of the TV. She was living in a smaller and smaller space, both in the house and in my life. The irony was that I hadn't taken anything from her. She had given it away, her place in my life, her position in my mind. All I had done was stop catching what she dropped. By the middle of January, it was obvious. She wasn't fighting for us anymore. She was fighting for relevance, for a foothold in a life that had moved on without her. And I wasn't slowing down to let her catch up. The end didn't come with a fight. It came with a quiet morning in late February, the air outside still sharp with winter. I was packing a small duffel bag for a weekend trip when she appeared in the doorway. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, arms crossed, like she was searching for the right words. When they came, they were small. "Are we okay?" Months ago, I would have asked her the same thing. I would have wanted to know why she was distant, why she looked past me instead of at me. But now, there was no need for questions. I knew the answer. And I knew the truth, that whatever we had been, it had ended long before this moment. I zipped the bag, looked at her once, and said, "We're done pretending." My tone was flat, not cruel. No raised voice, no accusation. Just a fact. She started to speak, but stopped when she saw I wasn't engaging. Her eyes searched for anger, for pain, anything she could hold on to. I gave her none. The quiet between us was heavier than any argument could have been. I picked up the bag and walked past her. No goodbye kiss, no handshake, no final glance. Just the sound of my steps in the hallway. She stayed rooted to the spot, frozen by the realization that the control she'd once had was gone for good. By the time I reached the door, I knew she understood. Not because I told her, but because she could feel it. The finality in my walk, the absence in my eyes. This wasn't a threat, or a tactic, or a game. It was the end. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a clean slate. I put my bag in the car, slid into the driver's seat, and for the first time in years, felt no weight on my chest. As I pulled away, I thought of the words I'd never say to her face, because they weren't for her. They were for me. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. And with that, she was part of my past. Silent, distant, finished. The rest of my life was waiting, and I had no reason to look back. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.